And I just remembered to turn on the recording, so excuse me for just a second. I make sure that we're recording. So we are recording now, introducing the STEPs program. STEPs is a self-study program, and it's open to any museum, historical society, historic site or house. And you don't even have to be history, actually. We have libraries, art museums, other types of organizations that are enrolled in STEPs. So it's not just for history, but it is intended primarily for history museums. It is also designed primarily for small and mid-sized organizations that may not feel ready for other assessment programs. But larger institutions also find STEPs to be helpful, and some of them use STEPs as a checklist or refresher, as an internal resource guidebook. They also use it for training for entry-level staff, volunteers, and interns. So there's lots of different ways STEPs can be used, and that's one of the things that I really like about this program is that it is very flexible. Unlike other assessment programs, the STEPS program does not have an application. It doesn't have any eligibility requirements, and it's open for enrollment all the time. So there aren't any special dates or time periods when you can enroll in the program. The program was first launched in 2009, and since then we've had more than 930 organizations from across the country enroll in the program. And you can see up on the map it covers coast to coast, north to south, and some Canadian institutions enrolled in it as well. As I mentioned, STEPS does not have an eligibility requirements or an application, so you can enroll anytime by online, by phone, through a printed enrollment sheet. There's a one-time fee of $175, and so once you pay that fee, you're in the program for as long as you want to be. You do have to be an institutional member of AASLH for at least the first year. We hope that you'll continue to be a member because you get a lot of good resources with history news and our weekly electronic newsletter, but it is a requirement for at least the first year. There's the STEPS website that offers lots of different resources, and I'll talk about that in just a moment and talk about the certificates as well. For the enrollment fee, you receive not only the workbook and the website, but you also receive national recognition for the certificates that your organization earns. You get a nice little window decal to put on your front door or window, and you also receive discounts on workshops, webinars, courses, and publications that AASLH produces. So let's talk first about the STEPS workbook. This is really at the core of the STEPS program. It is a spiral-bound workbook, and there are 6 sections to the book, and you can see those up on the screen. Mission, vision, and governance is the first. Management is the last. They're kind of bookends. They have a lot in common with each other, so we decided that that was a good way to start and conclude the workbook. But you can actually take these sections in any order that you want. You don't have to start with mission, vision, and governance, although we do recommend that. But I will talk in a few minutes about a couple of different ways you can approach the workbook. So a really nice benefit of having this hard copy workbook is that it documents an organization's progress, which, as many of you know, can be very valuable when there are transitions in paid and unpaid staff, as well as with board members. So there's lots of room in the workbook where you can write down projects that your organization wants to undertake in order to meet the performance indicators, and notes on other things that you've accomplished. So I want to show you an example from the workbook. This is from the Mission, Vision, and Governance section. And you'll see, starting on the left, you have the standard, which is a very broad statement. In this case, this one is about mission, that the institution has a clear understanding of its mission and that it communicates why it exists and who benefits as a result of its efforts. So again, a very broad statement. We move then into the center column, and this is the self-assessment question that your organization will want to ask itself. And how that's done differs by organizations. Some organizations like to have members of the board work on this questions like this. Some organizations like to have a combination of board members, paid and unpaid staff, perhaps others within the organization. In some cases, it may just be one person who answers the questions. We recommend that there be groups of people because then everyone learns from the process. So these assessment questions guide your group in then looking to the column on the right-hand side of the performance indicators. And you can see that there are 3 levels, basic, good, and better, and there are check boxes next to each one. So you can go down the list and check off which performance indicators your organization is currently meeting. And if it's not meeting any of these yet, then you can go to the right-hand side of the workbook, which of course you can't see in this slide. Go to the right-hand side and there are columns with lines where you can write in something that needs to be done. Let's say if you're looking at the better performance indicator and you see that the recommendation is that the mission statement be reviewed every 3 to 5 years, perhaps you haven't reviewed your mission statement in 10 years, and so you may want to write over on the right-hand side of the workbook, our board needs to review our mission statement, and that can be put into your goals, your long-range plan, your to-do list, whatever it is. But it's a great way then to take those different recommendations and things that need to be done and move them into a plan of action. So as I said, the workbook makes it very easy for you to take notes and for those notes to stay with the organization instead of, if you have a transition in leadership, those things may not get passed on to the next leaders, whether that's on the board, staff, or volunteers. So this is one place that can record those things that you've identified that would improve your organization. Of course, AASLH understands that not every organization is going to be able to make it to the better level in all 6 sections. We have lots of organizations taking part in STEPs. They may be at the basic level in one section, and they may be at the good or better level in another section. Everyone is working at their own pace to try and meet as many of the performance indicators as they can. We know that many organizations will be in STEPs for 5 years, maybe even 10 years. And as I always tell them, that's okay. STEPs is a self-paced program. Yes, we want you to earn certificates and move through the program, but we also understand the capacity issues that some organizations face. There are times when you may have to set the program aside for a while. Let's say you're busy doing school programs or a capital campaign or whatever it is. And so we know that with small to mid-sized organizations, there's a lot going on, and that you'll work at your own pace to meet those performance indicators that you're able to meet. But I think the most important thing to take away from that is that at least by working on STEPs, you know that you're striving to get somewhere and that you know what the expectations are instead of kind of living in the dark and plodding along and not really having a direction. You have a clear path, and everyone within your organization is hopefully on that path with you. And so that's one of the best things that STEPs can do for an organization, is to get everyone on the same path, moving toward the same set of goals. So whether your organization works on STEPs within a group of board members or staff or unpaid volunteers, there's lots of different things that can be done without spending a lot of money. And so money is really not an obstacle within the STEPs program. There are lots and lots of performance indicators that pertain to communication and consensus building instead of spending money. And you can see up on the screen a number of examples like a board orientation manual or an ethics code, a collections policy. As you all know, these don't take a lot of money to draft and vote on and implement, but they do take a lot of discussion and compromise sometimes, perhaps some research. So these are the types of things that you can really dig in and address at your institution if you don't have a lot of money, and then you may be able to plan for and plan and budget for some projects that perhaps do take some funds, like perhaps purchasing acid-free supplies for collections care, or perhaps you need some shelving. Those things can go on to a waiting list, and as you fundraise, at least you have specific examples of things that will move your organization forward. But for the most part, many of the recommendations have to do with policies and practices. So I want to talk now about a couple of different ways that you can approach the STEPs workbook. As I mentioned when I showed you the cover of the workbook, there are 6 sections, and yes, you can work in any order that you want. And so the first approach that you can take is what I call the vertical method, which is you go through one section and you go down the page, and then you go to the next page and you go down. As soon as you finish one section, you go on to the next. And so like collections, this is Stewardship of Collections is the section on the screen, and so you would move through this section and do as much as you can and then move on to another section. So that's what I call the vertical method, and that's pretty much the traditional method that we started out recommending that participants use. But then we were told about a way that one organization in West Texas used STEPs, and I liked it so much that it's actually the approach that I recommend more often than the one I just talked about. And this one I call the horizontal method. And this one is where you look at only the basic indicators across all 6 sections, and then you come back and look at the good indicators across all 6 sections before then going on to the better. What this does is it helps an organization to do 2 things. Number one, it keeps people from being feeling overwhelmed. Perhaps they are focusing on the good and the better performance indicators and saying, we'll never be able to do these. We don't have this kind of time. We don't have the money. It calms people. It gets them to be focusing just on the basic indicators so that you can get some success under your belt, earn your bronze certificates for those basic ones, and then move on to the next ones. This can be very helpful, especially if you have some hot button issues within your board or your organization. You can again reassure everyone, we're just going to look at the basic and then we'll move on. The other thing that this helps with is, let's say in the collections section, that it says that, like on the screen, it says that a loan agreement. You should have a loan agreement. Well, if you decided to use the other method, the vertical method, and perhaps you don't get to the collections section for a year or maybe even more, maybe you've left it to the last, you may go several years without having a written loan agreement. But by using the horizontal method, it will help you to fill in those gaps of very important things like a loan agreement, a collections policy, a mission statement. You will see those very soon, or as you go through the basic indicators. So you pick up those important documents that perhaps you don't have, instead of waiting another year or 2 before you say, oh my gosh, we need to have a loan agreement. So that's why I recommend this approach more often than the vertical method. Now, the third approach that you can use is really an approach that I recommend when people, they may say, we just really don't have time to do this, or we're in the middle of a capital campaign, or we're down a part-time paid staff person, and so we're all kind of scrambling to get things going. And this approach is, I say, if you can just do something within the program, keep the workbook on your desk, and if you are working with your board on a new policy for something, or you create a new form, go and find it in the workbook and check it off. At least you know you're getting somewhere until you can allocate more time to the program and do either the horizontal or vertical method. So at least keep the workbook on your desk, flip through it, and find the things that you are accomplishing right now until you can find more time to spend on the book. Really, what I think one of the things that I really emphasize about STEPs is that it creates a structure where you can take your daily work activities, things that you're working on, again, policies and procedures, and it provides a structure so that you know the direction you're moving in, and you have a list of things that you can be working on. So it's kind of like having a house. The foundation is there, everything that you have, but the structure, the walls and the roof and the basic structure is like the STEPS program. It keeps everything up and organized, and you kind of see what you have and what needs to be worked on. So it is a good structure for making progress within your organization. Now, some of you may have heard that we have started a review of the program this year to see what needs to be added, since the program is now about 8 years old. What I want to say about this, and you can see up on the screen some of the different topics we're going to be looking at, but I want to reassure anyone whose organization is going to enroll in STEPs is that you will not need to start over when the new workbook comes out. You're not going to be expected to pick up any new material and come back and re-earn certificates. The new version of the workbook will not be ready until 2019 at the earliest, and even then we will allow the use of both the old and the new workbooks for at least 18 months. So really you're looking at sometime in 2021 or 2022 before the new version will actually be the one that we'll be using. So I encourage you to keep in mind that this enhancement project is going on, but that you will not be told that you have to start over. I want to talk a little bit also about the STEPS community website. This is a website that's open only to organizations that are enrolled in the program. It is a benefit of the program. You receive unlimited access to this website. So any board member, paid and unpaid staff within your organization can create a username and password and use this website. You can see up along the toolbar, you have all sorts of the different sections. This resource section is the most extensive one, and it is filled with sample policies, sample documents, links to helpful sites. We're adding to it all the time, and so that's where you can go if you're looking for a collections management policy, sample job descriptions, things like that. You can go to this site, right to this section, and look at the examples that we have. Let's talk a minute about the certificates. So you can earn bronze, silver, and gold certificates as your organization is meeting the performance indicators in each of those 6 sections. So what you do is once, let's say, your organization is meeting all of the basic indicators in the management section, you fill out the form that's at the back of that section of the workbook, have either your director or your board president sign it, and then you mail it to AASLH, and we will send you a certificate. And these certificates can be framed and displayed in your facility to let visitors, board members, anyone in your community know that you are working towards meeting national standards. And these certificates can be a big help in requesting funds, applying for grants, justifying why you need, X number of dollars for equipment or new exhibits, more storage materials, whatever it is. And so as you earn those certificates, we also list your name on our website, and we have heard from funders that it does make a difference with them, because they know that when you are asking for money, that you have a reason and a justification for why you're asking for that money. So the certificates are important, and they can be a big help in keeping your organization moving forward. When we piloted the STEPs program back in 2008, one of the valuable things that we learned from the STEPs participants is that they find working within a group of STEPs organizations to be especially helpful. And it's that support group or community of practice model that offers an accountability mechanism that everyone finds so helpful. They also like the idea of the shared learning, the collaboration, the camaraderie. And so we have been encouraging organizations to find a STEPs group, if there is one in their area, or even to start one. They find that when they take part in a STEPs group, many of the organizations find that they stay on track more, they procrastinate less, and they make really good contacts with organizations in their areas. Some of the states that have groups right now are Connecticut, Ohio, Kansas is starting one, Tennessee has one that hasn't been as active lately, but AASLH did receive some funding several years ago to start that group, and so you may be able to find funding from a community foundation or other foundation or agency. Some of these STEPs groups are very informal. They may only meet once or twice a year. They may keep in contact only by phone. Alaska had one that was phone-based, and I'm not sure if they're still doing anything with that right now, but Connecticut is probably the most well-structured and funded, and Connecticut is funded through their Humanities Council, and they actually offer mentors and workshops, and they've had a lot of good success with that program. I think about 47 organizations in Connecticut have been through the Connecticut STEPs program, and they're looking to start another group here in the next couple of months. So, I'm a big fan of the STEPs groups because I think about when I spent time in Oklahoma when I worked in field services and with the Oklahoma Museums Association, and I would go out to especially the rural areas, but not always rural, but so many times meeting with people at small organizations who felt isolated. They didn't have anyone else in town to talk about museum things, museum issues, museum challenges. And so there also weren't classes for them to take about how to operate a museum or a historic site. And so they were very much isolated from learning more about how to improve their organization. And I tell people that I truly believe that we should never underestimate the value of that time that we spend with colleagues who work in the same type of world that we work in, with museums and historic sites and houses. The amount of shared learning that goes on in workshops and conferences and things, and the same thing that can happen with a STEPs group. It's just very beneficial, I think, especially when you have a self-study program like STEPs. If you have a group to work with and to keep contact with, is very helpful and beneficial. So again, if you decide to enroll in STEPs, I encourage you to look around and see if there are other organizations in your area working on the program, and perhaps start a STEPs group. And as I think about STEPs groups and talk about them and talk to groups, again, the idea of being isolated from other museum workers is important. But the other thing also that I think about is that the work that needs to be done at the museums in our country, it's endless. We all know this. There is never a dull moment. There's never a short to-do list. There's always something that needs to be done. But the problem is that our energy and our resources are not unlimited. We all know this. It's when I worked as a curator and knew that our collection would never be cataloged in my lifetime. It would not be finished. And so that was something that I had to expect. And so assessment programs like STEPs are a really valuable tool for moving an organization forward because, as I mentioned earlier, about the structure. And it helps everyone within an organization to move in that same direction toward a set of common goals. Peg is asking, but how do we determine which other local organizations are enrolled in STEPs? If you will contact me, I can tell you which organizations are enrolled in your area or in your state. So just send me an email and ask me. As I said, keeping everyone moving in the same direction. And so when you have an assessment program that's helping you do that, and you're able to connect your planning, your decision making, your fundraising, connect all of that to an assessment program and to national museum standards, you'll find that your organization will gain credibility, and that funders, they like to know that a long-range plan is based on something that can be justified and substantiated, and that your organization's progress can be measured. We all know that from granting agencies and other programs. They want to know, how are you going to measure your success? And so having a program like STEPs can help you do that. You can say, we have earned a silver certificate. We are at the good level in management. And we know that because of the STEPs program. So you'll have a much easier time articulating your goals and your accomplishments when, as I said, you can connect them to the same benchmarks that museums across the country are also striving for. So that's pretty much the nuts and bolts. I have a couple of examples I want to show you of what some organizations are doing with STEPs. One of the things that I hear from organizations frequently, and like the Pioneer Museum in Fredericksburg, Texas, STEPs helped us to be more forward-thinking instead of being stuck in day-to-day challenges. This is one of those things that I hear from a lot of organizations. Our organization is stuck in a rut. We've been in a rut for a long time. We don't know how to get out of the rut. And so assessment programs can help you do that. And, oftentimes it's lack of funding, lack of helpers, whether it's paid or unpaid. And then the biggie, the lack of time. And I have a sense that probably a number of you are nodding your heads saying, yes, that's right, lack of time, lack of people, lack of funding. All of these things can keep an organization in a rut for years. No doubt the vast majority of our museums and historic sites need more of all three of these things. But as I tell so many of our STEPs members, we can't afford to keep waiting for those things to happen. I think it's much healthier for our organizations if we decide that we need to be creative in finding workarounds or solutions that help us find more time, for example. And, we all have different ways that we keep to-do lists or we focus on what we're going to be doing this week, but it's a matter of finding workarounds. So I have a poll that I'm going to put over on the middle of the screen. So if your organization is in a rut, do you think it is due primarily to which of these things? Let's see how some of you, what some of you think the main reason is for being in a rut. Oh, I see. New initiatives always happening, but no time for completion. That is a big one. Um, and I've experienced that too. In an organization I worked, we always had a board member who had these grand ideas, um, and got everyone excited about them, but was never around to help us complete them. So lack of clear priorities is another one. I see 3 people have noted that one. Too much attention to day-to-day tasks instead of the big picture. It's so easy to jump at every little thing and try and put out fires all day, and then you get back to your desk at the things that you wanted to get done or needed to get done, and you have an hour left before your day is over, which tends to make many people stay long past the time that they should. So yes, and then 2 people said all of the above, which I think is probably a really common thing too. So all of these things can contribute to an organization being in a rut. Let me pull that back and let's see. Okay, let's look at another organization. Let me pull this over just a minute. Let's see. I can't seem to make it there, make it disappear. Okay, let's look at another organization. Here's the Black Heritage Society of Washington State, and helping a board of directors learn more about museum operations is one of the most valuable accomplishments we hear from participants like this group. You know, when you think about it, a lot of board members come into this work without any real basis or foundation for how an organization like a museum operates. And so, as Stephanie from Black Heritage Society told me, it gave them a common language to describe and achieve clear goals. It sounds so simple, and yet it's something that until it's made clear to us, we don't really think about that. And we wonder why board members aren't on board with things and why they don't understand something. I remember from Texas, an organization that was an early participant in STEPs told me when they earned their first certificate, the director said to me, she said, after we celebrated the first certificate that we earned, several board members came up to her and said, oh my gosh, now we understand what you do all day for your job. We didn't know you had all these policies. We didn't know they needed to be reviewed. And so the light bulb came on what a museum does, what a museum director does. So there's another example. Here we have New London Public Museum in Wisconsin. And again, board members have a better understanding of how museums work. And I really like number 2 on this list. Our strategic plan is less vague. That's a big one. I think that's just really a big accomplishment, and something that when they recognize that can be a game changer for an organization. We have an organization, a county historical society affiliated with county government. They needed some way of demonstrating, justifying to county officials that they were following national standards. And so they were an early participant in STEPs because it met their need for being able to say to the county, yes, we are trying to meet national standards. Essex Historical Society in Connecticut. Now they're part of the STEPs group up in Connecticut, and they have used STEPs to tackle some fundamental issues. How many of us can say with confidence that our mission and our vision statement and our bylaws are current, they're relevant, and they're meaningful enough to guide our organization? I think that's significant. And this is another organization where STEPs help them with strategic planning. What I really like about Essex is that they accepted the challenge of addressing what they called thorny issues. I remember reading when they said they uh, would come to board meetings, and they sent me a kind of a report on what they were doing, and said when they would come to board meetings and the topic of space allocation would come up, that they would just stare at each other across the table. They didn't even know how to begin a discussion that I assume was kind of a hot button issue. They had several buildings on the grounds. Things had kind of always been done the same way, but they knew that their space allocation was out of kilter. There were problems, and they weren't even sure how to start that discussion. And as you can see on the slide, they say these topics, let alone actions, would have been unheard of before taking part in STEPs. It gave them the structure within which to have those discussions. More space allocation issues that they addressed, how to use different buildings. They knew that their archives building was underutilized. They had another building where the offices were upstairs, which was not convenient and very accessible for elderly volunteers, other staff who or visitors who had difficulty with the stairs. So they also talked about major changes to interpretation in their historic house. And as they say, STEPs gave their organization the opportunity to think creatively and permission to experiment. They started with things that they knew could be undone if they decided they didn't like them. But this was a program that gave them permission to rethink how they had been doing things for years. So I want to open up question and answer now, comments. Anything that anybody wants to talk about, go ahead and put it in the chat box. Let's see, what else? As I said, we have about 930 organizations in STEPs right now. And if you earn all gold certificates, and not every organization earns all 6. Sometimes if you don't have historic structures or landscapes, you only have to earn 5. And we actually had an organization in Minnesota that didn't have any collections. They were mainly a publishing historical society, and so they didn't have to do the collections section. So if you do earn all gold certificates that apply to your organization, you graduate, and we recognize you at the AASLH annual meeting at the Leadership Awards Banquet, and you get to come across the stage and get your graduation certificate. So we have a question from Brad, and it says, you said to contact you to find other organizations and STEPs in your area. Same thing, yes, to find out about STEPs groups in your area, yes, contact me and I can tell you. I try to keep on top of all the information and news about STEPs groups. So if I have heard of one, yes, I will let you know. If you will send me an email, let me put my email address in the chat box. There you go. There's my email address. Other questions? How would you integrate STEPs with doing a strategic plan? One or the other first? Robert is asking from Ohio. I would definitely recommend that you do them at the same time. You don't have to be finished with STEPs before you do a strategic plan, but you would definitely want to enroll in STEPs because it can help to pinpoint and identify things that you may not have thought of, or that you have thought of, and that STEPs will confirm for you that need to be done sooner rather than later. So definitely STEPs works very well in tandem with writing a strategic plan. Yes, and Brad says that the mission, vision, and governance section will help you with strategic planning, and that is correct. And we also have, I know, at least one sample strategic plan in our resource section of the STEPS community website. Other questions? I will leave the chat box open for several more minutes, and if you think of anything. I do want to tell you about a couple of things. Well, first of all, right now, this month, we are offering a STEPS bonus, and that is if you enroll in STEPS, you get 4 free webinar recordings. And I can't remember which recordings they are off the top of my head, but they are ones that have been done in the last year or so, and you can share those recordings with everyone within your organization. So that is I think it's about a $45 or $60 value for those recordings. So that is until the end of this month. We also have, I want to talk about a couple of different events we have coming up. Next week, if your museum, historic site, or has any interest in interpreting agriculture, we have a webinar coming up on January 30th, right here in this classroom. It's called Growing Things, Case Studies in Interpreting Agriculture. So the link is up on the screen for registering for that. And then in February, we have something that, this is something new that we're doing. The third week of February, it's called Nightmare at the Museum Week. And we will be doing 2 webinars that week. There's one webinar on deaccessioning, and if you've been following Museum L or articles in your newspaper or things online, I mean, it's pretty much everywhere. You know that there are issues with deaccessioning, different actions that different museums are taking, and a lot of chatter within our profession about deaccessioning and what you should and should not be able to do with collections. So I encourage you to think about that one. And then on February 22nd will be a second webinar that week on fraud. And I don't know if any of you have ever experienced having fraud committed against your organization. I have. AASLH had fraud committed against it. It was discovered about 7 years ago, and it is a devastating thing to happen to an organization, and we want to help museums and other nonprofits prevent that type of nightmare happening to them. So this webinar on the 22nd of February is on preventing fraud, and we have Kelly Paxton, who is the creator of the blog called Pink Collar Crime. She'll be here as a speaker. So I encourage you to check our calendar for both of those webinars. We'll also be doing a Twitter chat that week on things like that happen at your museum. So check out the calendar for those. And then also we have an exhibit makeovers workshop in Charlotte, North Carolina coming up in March, and there's a link on the screen for that one. But we have lots of interesting things coming up on the calendar, and we do offer STEPS Lab webinars, a couple of those, 3 or 4 of those every year, and we'll be having one of those come up in April on repatriation and cultural curation. So you'll want to look for that. There's always something of interest on our calendar coming up. So anybody have any other questions? Like I said, I'll leave the chat box open. But also, I'm going to put these links up here. Here's a link to our continuing education calendar. And also, if we do have a link there for a brief survey, if you will give us some feedback on today's webinar and tell us what other topics you'd like to see addressed in webinars, we'd love to hear from you. I also have 2 handouts you can download. There's one, a STEPs information sheet that perhaps you'd like to take to your board of directors or to other folks within your organization. You can download that. And then there's also the STEPs enrollment form if you need that. So with that, I think we are finished for the day. I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. And like I said, I'll leave the chat open if you have any questions, or feel free to send me an email if you'd like to set a time to chat by phone. Thanks, everyone.